So welcome to the 10th and final talk of this year's Duquesne Philosophy Speaker Series. It's our great honor, I believe, to welcome C.D.C. Reeve, whom many of you know as a translator of many Platonic dialogues especially. He's translated 6, as I gather, especially for Hackett, and he has also now translated several Aristotelian treatises too. So a while ago the Politics, most recently the Ethics, and he's about to publish a translation of the Metaphysics. He is Delta Kappa Epsilon Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill since 2001. And for 25 years before that, he was a professor at Reeve College. His specialties are ancient philosophy, especially Plato and Aristotle, but also the philosophy of sex and love and the philosophy of film. And you can find his publications on academia.edu, I gather. He has 8 monographs to his name. Mostly on Plato and Aristotle, but also one called Love's Confusions, which I recommend as a way into his work as well. And those are with prestigious presses like Harvard, Oxford, and Hackett. And I want to say also that I welcome him as my dissertation supervisor and also a good friend. It is possible. And so, since I'm speaker coordinator and I have invited him, in fact, this is the 3rd time, he wouldn't be here were it not for me, but as my dissertation supervisor, I wouldn't be here were it not for him. And that's a paradox with which I'll leave you as we welcome C.D.C. Reeve.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure to come back to Duquesne and to Pittsburgh and to see old friends and make some new ones. I had a wonderful visit to Patrick's Republic class this morning. Great questions. Very impressed by the students and their interests. Well, the topic of my talk is happiness, ? And you'll get clear about why the question mark is there as the talk progresses. So I'm going to start with what I call 5 episodes in the prehistory of happiness. Just what that means, I think, will become clearer too. And the first one is from Plato's Symposium, and it's Diotima's examination of Socrates. In that examination, a moment arrives at which Socrates cannot say what the person who possesses beautiful things gets by possessing them, but can say this about the person who possesses good things. That, I said, this is Socrates, I'm better placed to answer. He'll be eudaimon. Yes, she said, because those who are eudaimon through possessing good things, and will no longer goes on to ask, and what reason does the person who wishes to be eudaimon have for wishing it? Your answer seems final. True, I said. So eudaimonia is the name then for whatever it is that puts a stop to the question, why do you want to wish for that? Once I say, because it will make me eudaimon, you supposedly know all there is to know. Eudaimonia is thus the final practical end, or reason, that stops the why question. Why do you want to earn a lot of money? Why do you want to live in a split-level house? Why do you want a good job on Wall Street? Because it will make me eudaimon. Nobody asks, why do you want to be eudaimon? Now, what good things eudaimonia consists in, though, that's hotly disputed. What it means, that it has that role of stopping why do you want, everyone agrees with that. But what does it consist of? That's hotly disputed. And this is the second episode, which is from the Nicomachean Ethics. It's Aristotle. About its name, Aristotle says, most people are pretty much agreed, since both ordinary people and sophisticated ones say it is eudaimonia, and suppose that living well and doing well are the same as being eudaimon. Concerning eudaimonia, however, and what it is, they're in dispute, and ordinary people do not give the same answer as wise ones. For ordinary people think it is one of the plainly evident things, such as pleasure or wealth or honor, some taking it to be one, others another. So we can express this by saying that eudaimonia is a formal notion, meaning that eudaimonia is by definition the correct ultimate answer to any practical why question, but one that leaves open whether there is anything that the term eudaimonia refers to. Maybe there's no such thing, right? But if there were, this is what it would do. It would put an end to why questions. Compare, for example, God is by definition the name of whatever it is that created the universe from nothing, which doesn't imply directly that there is such a thing. I know what it is to be a God, but is there a God? I might dispute that question. Now the third episode, so those are the first two episodes, one from the Symposium, one from the Nicomachean Ethics. And the third one is also from the Symposium, and this one is the time of our lives. To the question of how long we would need to possess the relevant good things in order to be eudaimon, Diotima and Aristotle give quite different answers, answers that merit a bit of exploration. First, Diotima. There's nothing else that people are in love with except what is good, but oughtn't we to add that what they love includes their possessing what is good, and not only possessing it, but always possessing it. In that case, we can sum up by saying that love is of permanent possession of what is good. So you love the good. What you love is you want to have it, possess it. You want the good to be yours. And moreover, you want the good to be yours forever. So the ultimate object of our wishes and desires, in her view, then, involves eternal life, since in wishing to be eudaimon, and wishing good things to be ours forever, we're wishing to be around forever to possess them. Now, Diotima's answer that what we want is we want eternal happiness. Right? Anything less than that is less good than the eternal kind. Diotima's answer can seem both plausible and simple. Roland Barthes says somewhere that the thought that we are mortal is an unnatural one. She thinks there's something right about that. It's, in some sense, hard to think that we will die. But it does have some controversial presuppositions, of which I'm just going to notice two. The goods in whose possession eudaimonia consists have to be goods we can make sense of possessing forever. Those would be the kinds of goods that we could think, I could have those forever. And the possessors of them ourselves must also be things we can make sense of as living forever in possession of them. The Christian idea of heaven says there are such things. We could live forever. And moreover, we could have eternal happiness. We could possess whatever happiness consists in forever. So there's a plausibility to it, as plausible as people find such stories about themselves in the afterlife. A lot of people find them very plausible. So we would have to say, yeah, there's something plausible about Diotima's answer. Next, Aristotle again. Having argued that the good in which eudaimonia consists is activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, and if there are more virtues than one, says in accord with the best and most complete, Aristotle goes on to add, furthermore, in a complete life, at bios teleos. For one swallow does not make a spring, nor one day, nor similarly does one day or a short time make someone blessed and eudaimon. So, right, you need something, a complete life. So Diotima's answer is, you need the good things to be yours forever. Aristotle's answer is, you need them, have them in a complete life. Now, sometimes a complete life, for Aristotle, seems to be one that reaches normal life expectancy. In the Magnum Aurelia, one of the three treatises, the Eudaimonia Ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics, and the great ethics of the Magnum Aurelia, are the three, it's correctly said among the majority that a life's happiness should be judged in its longest time, since what is complete should exist in a complete time and a complete human being. So the thought is you should take, what you want is to have the good things be yours throughout a normal life expectancy. But that can't be its meaning in the Nicomachean Ethics. And here's a passage that shows us this. And it's annoying that Aristotle is the only account, explicit account, of what a complete life is in Aristotle, is this one from the Magnum Aurelia. But it's clear that by the time he wrote the Nicomachean Ethics, or maybe somebody else wrote the Magnum Aurelia, Aristotle doesn't think that we can talk about a complete life in terms of normal life expectancy. This is what he says. It's true of an excellent person, too, that he does many actions for the sake of his friends and his fatherland, even dying for them, if need be. For he will give up wealth, honors, and thought about goods generally, in keeping for himself what is noble. For he will choose intense pleasure for a short time over weak pleasure for a long time, living well nobly for a year over many years lived in random fashion, and a single noble and great action over many small ones. This is presumably what happens with those who die for others. So that right now we see that in fact you could choose, guided by eudaimonia, wanting to make yourself eudaimon, you could choose to live a life that does not get its normal life expectancy precisely because of what you do and aiming at eudaimonia. You lay down your life for your friends, for example. So the sort of life to which a natural life expectancy belongs is a biological life. Elephants and plants have life expectancies in this sense. An individual human being's life, however, is a biographical life, the sort in which a biographer or a dramatist might also take an interest. And a biographical life, Aristotle is implying, can be eudaimon, can be choice-worthy and in need of nothing, even if it isn't of normal biological length, provided it contains sufficiently good things. So one great noble action, right, you might do it before you're 25, that could make your life eudaimon and lacking in nothing, so you have all the good things long enough to count as eudaimon. Now I went to the episode 4 on these episodes I'm picking out of the prehistory of happiness. Episode 4 is Aristotle on the effects of luck on eudaimonia. How susceptible to luck is eudaimonia? Having noted that bad things too can occur in a life and many reversals of fortune and all sorts of lucky accidents, and that the most prosperous may meet with great disasters in old age, as happened to Priam in the story of the events of Troy, Aristotle turns to consider whether we should follow Solon's advice to Croesus, which Herodotus describes in his histories, and wait to see the end of a person's life before judging it eudaimon. And Aristotle's conclusion is complex, and you need to sort of work through it. So here's the problem, right? Solon says to Croesus, you have to wait to see the end of a person's life before you judge them to be happy, because lots of bad things can happen. Maybe tomorrow, something terrible will happen to make you say the life wasn't happy after all. And Aristotle gives a very sophisticated and complicated response to Solon, and I'll just take us through it. So here's the first part. Suppose that we must wait to see the end in each case, and at that point call someone blessed, not as then being blessed, but because he was so before. Would it not be strange then, if when he is a eudaimon, we cannot truly attribute to him what he actually possesses, because of our not wishing to call the living eudaimon because of reversals of fortune, and because we suppose that eudaimonia is something steadfast and in no way easy to reverse, whereas the same person's luck often turns completely around. For it's clear that if we were to be guided by luck, we would often have to say that the same person is eudaimon and then wretched, turn and turn about, thereby representing the eudaimon person as a sort of chameleon and as someone with unsound foundations. His idea is that our reluctance to think like Solon is due to two facts. First, we think that we can call a person eudaimon at the time when we see him possessing the things in which eudaimonia consists. And so we don't have to wait to see what happens next. We can see that he's got them now. And second, we don't think that eudaimonia is unstable or easy to reverse in the way that it would be if it were entirely subject to the vicissitudes of fortune. So Aristotle thinks whatever eudaimonia is, we don't think that it's something that's so subject to luck that it can just be utterly at luck's mercy. Next, Aristotle refers to his own account of what eudaimonia does not consist in to explain or justify these facts about our reaction to Solon. Or is it that to be guided by luck is not at all correct? For it's not in it that living well and living badly are to be found, but rather a human life needs this to be added, as we said, whereas it is activities in accord with virtue that control eudaimonia, and the contrary ones that control its contrary. So the idea is that the good things in which eudaimonia consists, actions that are in accord with virtue or excellence, are not entirely subject to luck or fortune. And so when we see these in a life, we don't have to wait to see its end to judge a person eudaimon, at least not because of any worries about reversals of fortune. So the thought is, if Aristotle's right that eudaimonia consists of actions in accord with virtue, we see those occurring in a person's life. We don't have to wait to see what happens next. We can judge them eudaimon then. But this is by no means the end of the story. The next part seems to take back a little bit of what he just gave. Many things happen in accord with luck, however, that differ in greatness and smallness. But small strokes of good luck, or similarly of the opposite, clearly will not have a strong influence on a virtuous person's way of living, whereas great and repeated ones, when good, will make his life more blessed, since by nature they help to adorn it, and his use of them is noble and excellent. If they turn out the reverse, though, so if serious things turn out the reverse, they reduce or spoil his blessedness, since they involve pain and impede many activities. All the same, even in these cases, nobility shines through when someone calmly bears repeated strokes of great bad luck, not because he's insensitive to suffering, but because of being well-bred and great-souled. If, however, it is activities that control living, as we said, no blessed person will ever become wretched, since he will never do base or hateful actions. For a truly good and practically wise person, we think, will bear what luck brings graciously and make use of the resources at hand, and making use of the resources at hand will always do the noblest actions, just as a good general makes the best use in warfare of the army he has, and a good shoemaker makes the best shoes out of the hides he has been given, and the same with all other craftsmen. If this is so, however, a eudaimon person will never become wretched, nor blessedly eudaimon, nor the best candidate. He won't be that either if he runs up against luck like clams. He will not then be variable or easily subject to reversals of fortune, since he will not be easily shaken from his eudaimonia by just any misfortunes that chance to come along, but only by great and repeated ones. And from these, he will not return to being happy, or being eudaimon, again, in a short time, but if indeed he does so in a long and complete one, in which he achieves great and noble things. So, what you want to say is something like this. This is Aristotle's story. Virtue and its activities are resistant to luck, as we might put it, but not entirely impervious to it. If the luck is bad enough, they begin to... So you don't become wretched, but they do mar and blight your happiness if they're bad enough. Luck can mar a person's eudaimonia, but it cannot make him the opposite of eudaimon, namely wretched, or someone who does base or ignoble actions. Whence the famous conclusion of this line of thought about Solon. What then prevents us from calling happy the person who is, calling eudaimon, the person who is active in accordance with complete virtue and is adequately supplied with external goods, not for some random period of time, but in a complete life? Or must we add that he will continue living like that and will die accordingly, since the future is obscure to us, and we suppose happiness to be an end and complete in every way? If so, we shall call blessed those living people who have and will continue to have the things we mentioned. Blessed, though, in the way human beings are. And so the thought is that even at its best, our happiness is a fragile thing. So that's not, right, the way he sort of moves through it is, happiness consists in, if happiness consists in activities in accord with virtue, as Aristotle thinks, then those things are hard to shake us from. They're not easy to take away, but they're not impervious to really long courses of bad luck either. You won't become wretched. You won't do base or ignoble actions, even under those wretched conditions. Nonetheless, your eudaimonia will be blighted by what happens. So we're happy, or we're eudaimon, in the way that human beings are, unlike the way that gods are, for example, who can't be shaken by anything from their eudaimonia. We can, but we're not as fragile or subject to luck as we might think. Episode 5 is Solon on the effects of fortune on eudaimonia. Croesus, the king of Lydia, confident that he was the most blessed, most blessedly happy, or most eudaimon person of human beings, invited Solon, the architect of the Athenian constitution, to confirm his self-estimation, Croesus' self-estimation. But Solon famously demurred, citing Tellus the Athenian as most eudaimon, and Cleobus and Phaeton as second most. So Croesus expected to hear, oh, but you, Croesus, are the most eudaimon person in the world. You're the king of Lydia. Of course you are. But that's not what he hears from Solon. Then, by way of justifying his choices, Solon explains what he thinks blessedness, or eudaimonia, actually consists in. I'm now quoting Herodotus. Of course, it's impossible for one who is human to have all the good things together, just as there is no one country that is sufficient of itself to provide all good things for itself. But it has one thing and lacks another, and the country that has the most is best. So no single person is self-sufficient. He has one thing but lacks another. But whoso possesses most of them continuously, or who keeps them to the end, and then ends his life gracefully, he, my lord, may justly win this name you seek, at least in my judgment. But one must always look to the end of everything, how it will come out finally. For to many, the God has shown a glimpse of blessedness, only to extirpate them from the end. So his reason for thinking we have to wait to see the end, then, he's just said that, right? We have to wait to see the end. But here's the reason he gives, and it's given at some length. He says this: I put the boundary of human life at 70 years, so that all the days of a man's life are 26,250. Of all these days, not one brings to him anything exactly the same as another. So, Croesus, man is exactly what befalls him, or man is altogether a thing of fortune and chance. Pan esti anthropos sumfere. Man is simply a creature, it's often translated that way, as a creature of chance, or is just what luck makes him. To me, it's clear that you're very rich, and clear that you're the king of many men. But the thing that you asked of me, I cannot say of you yet, until I hear that you have brought your life to an end well. For he that is greatly rich is not more blessed than he who has enough for the day, unless fortune so attend him that he ends his life well, having all these fine things still with him. Our thought is, I need to see that you keep all these good things that you have before I can say whether or not you're eudaimon. Apparently then, Solon is to some extent on the same page as Plato and Aristotle in thinking that eudaimonia consists in the possession of good things. And the next thing Solon does is to compare a very rich but unblessed, that is, unblessed with good fortune, man, to a moderately rich but blessed one, arguing that the latter is a better one to be. Moreover, many very rich men are unblessed, and many who have moderate competence are fortunate. Now he that is greatly rich but is unblessed has an advantage over the lucky man, implying that unblessed is unblessed with good fortune or good luck, in two respects only. But the latter has an advantage over the rich and unblessed man in many. The rich and unblessed man is better able to accomplish his every desire and to support such great visitation of evil as shall befall him. He's got the resources to deal with much adversity. But the moderately rich and lucky man wins over the other in these two ways. True, he's not equally able to support both the visitation of evil and his own desire, but his good fortune turns these aside from him. He's uncrippled and healthy, without evils to afflict him, and with good children and good looks. If in addition to all this he shall end his life well, he is the man you seek, the one who is blessed, that is worthy to be called blessed. But wait until he's dead to call him so, till then call him not blessed, but lucky. So it's better to be moderately wealthy and lucky than to be very rich without the luck. Right? As it were, the luck takes away the tax that wealth helps you but doesn't completely enable you to resist. It seems then that when we set out to determine whether a person X is eudaimon, or equivalently for Herodotus, whether he has a eudaimon life, the question we're asking is, on each day of his life, did he possess enough good things? That's the line argument. What confers significance on the end, on the last day, isn't that it's only then that we can see, for example, the shape of X's life and be able to evaluate it as a life with a certain narrative structure. That's been argued powerfully in a very good book called Mourning Happiness by Solon. It's quite an interesting and long book. But he argues that the reason that Solon picks wait till the end is, as in a way, with a novel. You have to see how the plot turns out. You have to see what the structure of the life is before you can say it's happy. And I think that's wrong. It's not that we can't see the structure to the end, but rather that we cannot know on any day, except the last, what the subsequent days have in store for us. So we have the last day that we can say we don't know we now know what's coming. Anyway. It's only on the last day that we can know what subsequent days have in store. There are no subsequent days. In a life with a narrative structure, the order of events in a life makes a difference. But in a Solonic life, order is relatively unimportant. When we look at the life, we're for the most part can look at it as just day to day. We don't need to see its narrative structure. We just have to look at each day and see what is going on. Contemporary happiness studies do this too. They ask people to monitor how happy they feel at different moments throughout the day, and then they think, well, how happy were you that day is going to be a complicated function of those moments. Not simple, but that's the idea. And we might think there's a lot to be said for that. Why should the narrative structure matter so much as what day-to-day life is like that matters? And the reason, in turn, that we cannot know what subsequent days have in store for a person is, on Solon's view, that a human being is a creature of chance. So that all the goods in which his eudaimonia consists are things that chance can take away. And this marks the major difference with Aristotle, who thinks that virtue, which is the major such good, is not subject to chance, or as subject to chance as Solon thinks. And with Plato. In the Apology, you'll remember that Socrates assures us that a good man cannot be harmed in this life or the next, and that his affairs are not neglected by the gods, saying, look, if you're a good person, you've got all that it takes, in a sense, for eudaimonia. You can't be harmed. You can't have it taken away from you, because it's too secure a possession for that. So you could look at it this way. Plato, Aristotle, and Solon are all to some degree on the same page in thinking that happiness consists in the possession of good things. Right? They differ in that Solon thinks it consists in the possession of things that chance can take away. Plato and Aristotle thinks that that's not quite true. Many of the most important thing it consists of, chance can't destroy it by blemish, but it can't absolutely take away. Now, we've already seen in passing what some of the good things Solon has in mind are: health, good children, good looks, moderate wealth. And in the story, he tells of Tellus and of Cleobus and Biton, his candidates for the happiest and second happiest people in the world. Others are revealed. Here's what he says about Tellus, who's the most blessed of men. In the first place, Tellus's city was in a prosperous state when he had sons, noble and good they were. And he saw children in turn born to all of them, and all surviving. Secondly, when he himself had come prosperously to a moment of his life, that is, prosperously by our Greek standards, he had, besides, an ending for it that was most glorious. In a battle between the Athenians and their neighbors in Eleusis, he made a sally, routed the enemy, and died splendidly. And the Athenians gave him a public funeral where he fell, and so honored him greatly. That's the story of the most happy person. You hear of a prosperous city, sons born to his sons, dying nobly in a battle for his city. Persistent, moderate prosperity throughout a long life long enough to have grandsons, having good and living sons and grandsons, a glorious death, posthumous public honors, these are the good things that make Tellus the most eudaimon of men. And the second most eudaimon are Cleobus and Biton. And they tell you the story about them. Well, they were men of Argive race and had a sufficiency of livelihood, and besides a strength of body, such as I shall now show. They were both of them prize-winning athletes, and the following story is told of them as well. There was a feast of Hera at hand for the Argives, and their mother needs must ride to the temple. She had to ride to the temple, but the oxen did not come from the fields at the right moment to carry the cart to the temple. The young men, being pressed for lack of time, harnessed themselves beneath the yoke and pulled the wagon with their mother riding on it. 45 staves, or about 6 miles, they completed on their journey and arrived at the temple. When they had done that and been seen by all the assembly, there came upon them the best end of life. And in them the gods showed thoroughly how much better it is for a man to be dead than to be alive. For the Argive men came and stood around the young men, congratulating them on their strength, and the women congratulated the mother on the fine son she had. And the mother, in her great joy at what was said and done, stood right in front of the statue, and there prayed for Cleobus and Biton, her own sons, who had honored her so greatly, that the goddess should give them whatsoever is best for a man to win. And after that prayer, the young men banqueted and laid them down to sleep in the temple where they were, and they never rose more. But that was the end in which they were held. The Argives made statues of them and dedicated them at Delphi as of 2 men who were the best of all. So dying, right, in this case, this is what makes them. Dying in this way, that's what makes them eudaimon. Again, Solon begins with moderate and persistent prosperity. These people are moderately but persistently well enough. Then comes bodily strength, publicly recognized, honor exemplified in prize-winning athletics, recognized pious devotion to a mother and to the goddess Hera, a peaceful death signaling the lifelong possession of good things, and posthumous honors. What makes this life second in eudaimonia, we may surmise, is that it ended in youth and so lacked some of the important goods that Talus contained, good and living children and grandchildren, a heroic death fighting for one's city. Nonetheless, these are the happiest and second happiest humans in Solon's view. Although Solon doesn't attribute them by name to the heroes of the stories themselves show the importance of virtue and good character. Cleobus and Biton are noble and good children, like Talus's children. They are courageous, like Talus himself. Like him, they are satisfied with moderate wealth and prosperity. All 3 are citizens of cities that recognize and celebrate their characters and achievements. When the god showed how much better it is for a man to be dead than to be alive, he was testifying, we can safely infer, not that life is never worth living, no matter how lucky or how well supplied with these good things it is. If that were so, these good things would not really be good at all, but rather to the power of fortune and chance. Only when we dead are we beyond its potentially devastating reach. So the god is not saying that it's better not to have been born. Right? Because then there wouldn't be any good things. Right? It'd be better. The only really good thing would be the non-existence. It's rather that when you're dead, you're outside the reach of chance. And that's a good condition to be in, rather than being within its reach, that you might lose the good things. It's worth noting, and it's a point on which I'll return, that some of Solon's goods are private to the individual who has them, strength and good looks, whereas others are public goods, living in a prosperous city, receiving public honors, that are and can only be part of political life with others. It follows that the happiness these goods constitute is a mix of things. We might think ourselves, since I think we live in a very unhappy polis at the moment, our society doesn't seem to be functioning well or in good order, we might think of what the effect that has on our private well-being, that we think that, say, wealth is very badly distributed, that healthcare is inadequate, that soon, or too soon, perhaps we'll be threatened with the destruction of the planet by its heating up. These are all things that affect our ways of thinking about ourselves in the future. Being part of a happy society, a society that's thriving, on the other hand, has a positive impact. So those are the episodes from the prehistory of happiness that I wanted to talk about. Now I want to talk about happiness itself. And the question that I have in mind is whether we can or should identify it with eudaimonia. So far, with occasional lapses, because we normally translate eudaimon as happy and eudaimonia as happiness, I've mostly stuck to the Greek terms and not told you exactly what they mean. But now I want to ask explicitly, if that's what eudaimonia is, what I've just been describing in Aristotle, Plato, and Solon, should we think of it as what we think of as happiness? Well, what is happiness? We have to know that, right? We have to know what happiness is so we can decide whether eudaimonia is or not. Well, a recent and I think very good book by Daniel Hebron called The Pursuit of Unhappiness tells us that it is endengatt, 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 which isn't a German word, though it sounds like it might be one, but an acronym of mine. I've made it up as an acronym for what Hebron tells us. For what the book tells us is this: if someone emotionally endorses his life so that he's cheerful or joyful rather than sad, is engaged in it so that he's absorbed by it rather than bored or alienated, and is attuned to it so that he's relaxed rather than anxious or stressed, or is these things more than their opposites, he's arguably happy. That's what Hebron argues. Endorsement, engagement, attunement, endengatt. Endorsement, engagement, attunement. It just keeps it. If you remember the acronym, you can remember what the three things are. I had trouble. I kept always forgetting at least one of them. Endorsement, engagement, attunement. Endorsement. Okay, that's what we think happiness is. Arguably, if that's the way you are about your life, you're happy. Now, endorsement, engagement, and attunement do seem to be objectively valuable things. I think as soon as you hear them, you think, yeah, those are important. In any case, I'm going to accept that they are valuable, that it's valuable and good to endorse your life, to be engaged in an attunement. Everything else being equal, this is the best way or better way to be involved in your life than their opposites. But it's also obvious that they are subjective emotional states, states of a subject. Solon doesn't include such states on his list of good things, though perhaps we can infer from his stories that his happy triad did implicitly endengatt their lives. Maybe we can infer that, but we don't get a focus on psychological states. Just look at the list of goods I read, they're not mentioned. Both Plato and Aristotle, by contrast, do include subjective states as parts of, eudaimonia, since both think that pleasure is intrinsically involved in it, and pleasure, in a sense, seems to be more like a state of the subject, the psychological state, right? It's you feel the pleasure. But none of these ancient writers thought that subjective states were the only things involved in eudaimonia, or that it itself was such a state. So if, as I'm assuming, happiness is endengatt, or consists in endengatting our lives, being endorsing them, being engaged in them, and attuned to them, then happiness is manifestly not eudaimonia. Anyway, not as Plato, Aristotle, and Solon represent it, right? Because they don't think that happiness consists in simply your psychological connection to your life, that you endorse it, are attuned to it, and engage in. Now the question naturally arises, therefore, of whether we should be in favor of happiness, of endengatting our lives, or in favor of eudaimonia. Which of those two should we think is the right goal of our life? Is it eudaimonia, as we've just had it described by Plato, Aristotle, and Solon, or is it what Hebron describes, this relationship to our life of endorsement, engagement, and attunement? And what I mean by that, when I say which one should we go for, what I mean by that is what Diotima and Socrates mean in the first episode. Should we treat eudaimonia, or a eudaimon life, as the ultimate practical end or reason? Should we take X will make my life eudaimon as settling all why should I wish or want X questions? Or should we accord that status to what will make my life endengattable? So here's the question, right? When you finally come to the end of your answers to why questions, why do you want this? Why are you doing that? Why, right? Do you come to the stop at eudaimonia, as Plato and Aristotle and Solon have described it, or do you come to it at the place where Hebron describes it, so to speak? Well, my life, that makes my life endengattable. Right? When I've got those things, I endorse, I'm attuned, so that's the end. Or should it be this? No, that would make me eudaimon. And we can see that those are separate questions. So the question is, When we think about what the final kind of practical reason is, the one that settles what we should do, should we think of it in one of these terms or the other? It would be perfectly reasonable, I think, for someone to value as goods the sort of non-mental states that Plato, Aristotle, and Herodotus mention. And I suspect that most of us do value some or all of these things. We might think then that these goods are where all the action is. Perhaps this is like having healthy, noble children, being a member of a good and happy society. These are all good things, and you could easily imagine people say, yeah, so it's about the good things, right? It's all about what good things should you have in your life, not about what your attitude is doing. And as I say, I think most of us would agree that the things that Solon and Plato and Aristotle mention are all good things. We might think then, as I say, that these goods are settled the question. Perhaps X is a great composer or a great scientist, but a sad, alienated, and anxious one. He's not ending-getting his life, but he's a great scientist and is doing wonderful work. X doesn't end-and-get his life, but it's eminently worthwhile, we might think, because of the great value of the things, works of art, scientific theories, or inventions, realized in it. Right? So we might think, yes, that's a valuable life. He doesn't end-and-get it, but that doesn't make it not valuable. But if I ask, though, why X lives that life, why he brings about the things in it, we seem not to have an answer. Why does he do it? Notice that X may himself think that the things in his life are incredibly valuable. But that doesn't explain why, of all the incredibly valuable things, he fills his life with just these ones, given that the result is not a life he end-and-gets. Why does he want to live it? I see it's got valuable things in it, but there are other valuable things. Why does he want these when he doesn't end-and-get the life he has? Why doesn't he choose some other instead? Objective goods that aren't end-and-getted, then, seem not to constitute materials out of which a final practical end or reason can be forged. I don't come to the end because there's another why question I can ask. Why do you spend your life on these inventions, and great as they are, when in fact the life that you get from devoting them to is not one that you endorse or attune to? Suppose we follow Plato and Aristotle and add pleasure to the list. Right? So if X gets pleasure out of the objective goods in his life, will that be enough? So suppose he, rather than being sad, he actually takes great pleasure in these inventions. Well, it seems not. For can't X get pleasure out of his life while remaining sad, alienated, and anxious? You can get pleasure, but pleasure doesn't make you unsad, right, or unalienated or anxious. It just adds pleasure to your anxiety and your sadness and so on. Isn't pleasure also something that can fail to bind you to your life, something from which you can recoil? Perhaps the fact that you do get pleasure from a life like yours simply disgusts you. That you enjoy it doesn't make it better, it makes it worse, because you find that it's disgusting that you should get pleasure out of living a life like this, and that makes it worse, not better. So you can recoil from your own pleasure in things, rather than you can recoil from your own pleasure in life. So pleasure is not itself enough to bind you to your life in a way that ends all the why questions. It's perfectly reasonable to ask, why do you do this thing that gives you pleasure, that disgusts you? Right? We're not at the end of why questions yet. At the same time, a life that is otherwise empty of value, but is end-and-getted by someone living it, seems also to leave us with problems. Why, we might wonder, does he end-and-get a life filled with these worthless things? This is a version of the old pig-satisfied Socrates dissatisfied problem. Again, we seem not to have reached an ultimate practical reason, since we're still left with unanswered why questions. So imagine somebody, for example, who is endorses his life, is engaged and attuned with it, but it consists entirely of watching soap opera on television and eating popcorn. We might think, how can you end-and-get a life filled with such valueless and worthless things. We have a why question, and we don't have an answer to it. So again, we haven't reached Diotima's notion of what eudaimonia is. That just answers it, and we think, okay. What we need to do, it seems, is to combine the ideas of the ancients with our own, so that a life will be choice-worthy and lacking in nothing, if it involves many unquestionably valuable things, and is correctly ended gathered by the person whose life it is. So the thought is, let's take both. What you need in your life is really valuable things, and that you be attuned, and that you endorse, and so on. These theories, you're engaged with them, you endorse them, you're attuned to it, and they're objectively valuable. Doesn't that settle things? Now haven't we reached the ultimate practical reasoning? Well, that's true. Are we at the bottom of why questions? Why do you live like that? Well, it's filled with objectively valuable things. We all agree, yes. And I end in gather. I'm engaged, I endorse it, I'm attuned. Isn't that the end? Can I ask any why questions now? Well, yes. Here's a famous one. Now, we might think, especially if we've been reading Kant, to shift ground, that ultimate practical reasons have still eluded us. For a life could, it seems, be filled with really valuable things, be end and gathered by the person living it, and yet be rationally unsatisfactory. Why? Well, because the person living it might not deserve it. He might be living it unjustly. So when we ask him, with what right do you live so good a life? He might have no answer to give. He has no right to be so darn happy, or so eudaimon, or so attuned, endorsed, and so on to his life. It's unjust and unfair that he is, and that's a rational defect in him. There's a why question he can't answer. Why do you deserve to live? Now, moreover, once we raise the question of right, once we follow Kant in this way, we might legitimately wonder why we bother with all the rest. For if reasons of right and justice can trump or undercut whatever other values might be present in an end and gathered life, why not make them the ultimate practical reasons from the get-go? Why not just think that it's all about justice and right? That's what settles the question. I ask, why do you do what you do or live as you live? And you respond, because that's the right way to live. What does it matter then, whether you also end and gather your life, or whether it's got objectively valuable things of other kinds on it? Isn't it enough? Well, that's right that you do it. Kant himself answers this question as follows. It's often forgotten that that's not the bottom line for Kant. Kant has more to say than that. Without the congruence of moral and prudential happiness-focused reasons, without the combination of right and happy, as it were, if only in a supersensible kingdom of ends governed by a just divine ruler, Kant says, the majestic ideas of morality would not be incentives for resolve and realization, because they would not fulfill the whole end that is natural for every rational being. So Kant doesn't think himself that, yeah, it's right or just for me to live this way. It settles the question. There's more. This bit that I'm now reading. Indeed, he thought that these incentives to realization should motivate us to transform our earthly kingdoms into ones in which the congruence between these two kinds of reason is at least much greater. So on the one hand, there's the justice reasons, on the other hand, the eudaimonia-related reasons. We have to bring them into congruence so that, right, those who deserve happiness get it. So the two go together. The final destiny of the human race, this is from Kant's lectures on ethics, the final destiny of the human race is moral perfection, so far as it is accomplished through human freedom, whereby man, in that case, is capable of the greatest happiness. God does not simply will that we should be happy, but rather that we should make ourselves happy. And this is the true morality. It's a wonderful. So Kant's thought is very complicated, but essentially the thought is there are two defects that you can think of in a life. One is it's moral defects. You don't deserve or merit what you're getting. And the other is that you're not getting what you morally deserve. Right? So the thought is, I can look over here and think you should be happy because you're such a good person. But you're in a corrupt world, so the two don't meet. But the ideal is that they do meet. The priority Kant assigns to the right in relation to the good, even to the end and gettable good, is just that as a priority. It isn't the exclusion of the good from the realm of practical reason of the other. So when you tell me that you do what you do or live as you live because it's right to do so, or because morality requires it, we've not, in fact, reached justificatory bedrock. There is, in fact, more to say, though just how to say it is a matter of some delicacy. Some things, Aristotle says, encourage the thought that in being motivated to pursue what is noble, virtuous agents are being motivated to pursue what benefits others as an intrinsically choice-worthy end. Those who wish good things to their friend for the friend's own sake are friends most of all. It's noble to do good to someone without meaning to be repaid. The fair-minded person, these are all quotes from the Nicomachean Ethics, the fair-minded person is thought to act because of what is noble, all the more the better he is, and for the sake of his friend, disregarding his own interests. The good person does many things for the sake of friends and fatherland and will die for them if he has to. At the same time, so those sound like Kant's moral reason, right? You got to do what's right, right? Never mind about whether it pays off in terms of your eudaimonia. At the same time, he also says things that point in a quite opposite direction. Each person wishes good things most of all to himself. The virtuous person awards the noblest things and the ones that are most good to himself. The thought is, no, it sounds like it's my eudaimonia that matters, right? Not whether what I'm doing is right or just or fair. And what allows Aristotle to have it both ways, so to speak, is a contrast he draws, a brilliant one, I think, between two kinds of self-love or self-interest. So Aristotle is going to bring Kant's reasons of right and reasons that come from your own happiness together. He's going to do it in a different way from Kant. Those who reduce self-love or self-interest to a term of reproach call self-lovers as a term of reproach. Right? You're a selfish or self-loving person. They use this as a term of reproach, call self-lovers those who allocate themselves the greater share in money, honors, and bodily pleasures. For these are the things ordinary people desire and take seriously, on the supposition that they are the best goods, which is why they're fought over. Well, when I say, you're selfish, I mean you award to yourself. I'm sure you're selfless, but you award to yourself more of these goods, honor, pleasure, wealth, thinking them to be the best. That's what I'm thinking. And ordinary people are like this, which is why the term has come about, deriving from the most ordinary case, which really is a base one. So that kind of self-love really is bad. But those who are self-lovers in this way, they are justly objects of reproach. Those who award to themselves more of the fought-over goods of honor, wealth, and so on. And this is that it is those who allocate goods of this sort to themselves that most people are used to calling self-lovers is clear enough. So, for if someone were always taking more seriously than anything else the doing of just actions, or temperate ones, or whatever else might be in accord with the virtues, and in general were always keeping for himself what was noble, nobody would call this person a self-lover or blame him. This is the person who's always out to do the moral actions and thinks that those are the things that he most of all should do. Nobody would blame him for that, right? Because that's just what we, in a sense, you might think, we want him to be just and a person of this sort, though, would seem to be more of a self-lover than the one who awards himself the other goods. Why? Well, he allocates to himself the good things that are noblest and the ones that are best of all. So it's only if we think that the good things consist of pleasures and money and so on that we think self-love is bad. If we think that it also includes justice, temperance, courageous actions, and so on, then we'll think somebody who does those, and we think those are better than the other goods, then we will think, self-love is the way to go. You should award yourself more of those things. And if we all did it, we'd all be much happier. We'd all be just, fair, and temperate. The masses, the ordinary people, Aristotle says, think exclusively in terms of money, honors, bodily pleasures, and other external goods of the so-called auto. If we measure sacrifice in their terms, the virtuous agent is self-sacrificing, since he will sacrifice money, honors, and goods of competition, generally in procuring what is noble for himself. Right? He'll give those up in order to do the really good moral life. So it's a matter of giving you the money. He'll do it because it's nobler to give you the money, and it's better to be noble than to be rich. So he's going to want to keep the good for himself and give you the money rather than himself. If we measure sacrifice in terms of the greatest goods, on the other hand, the virtuous agent is entirely egoistic and not self-sacrificing at all. True, he will sacrifice doing noble actions to a friend, but only because it may be nobler to be responsible for his friend's action than to do it himself, so that he awards more of what is noble to himself. So you imagine two noble people. Each wants to do the noble action, right? That's the first stage. And then the other says, it's nobler to let you do it. Why? Then I get the better. Good. Right? It's a wonderful, at the heart of it, though, there lies, I think, one of the deepest things in ancient philosophy and ancient ethics that we have a very hard time crediting. Right? Because at the heart of it is simply about being good, being virtuous, is a greater good than getting pleasure or getting money or getting power. It's a better good. So in getting it, you're getting something that's better. We have a hard time really believing that. And so the final word, the last word of the talk, in a sense, removes the question mark from happiness, question mark, belongs to Socrates in the Plato. And this is the heart of the matter, already spotted clearly by Plato and dramatized in this great moment when Plato comes to Socrates in prison and says, let's get you out of here. And Socrates says, wait a minute. The last time when we talked, didn't we think that justice was the ruling point? Goes through this. He says, so one must neither do injustice in return. If someone is unjust to you, you mustn't return injustice, no matter what one has suffered at the other person's hand. And Crito, in agreeing to this, watch out that you're not agreeing to anything contrary to what you believe. You see, I know that only a few people do believe, will believe. And between those who believe it and those who don't, there's no common basis for deliberation. But each necessarily regards the other with contempt when they see their deliberations. Well, notice now that a kind of divide has opened up in our practical reasons, right? Now, the good, the virtuous, think that practical reasons bottom out in eudaimonia. Eudaimonia consisting of moral and virtuous actions. Right? On the other side, there are people who think it bottoms out in, well, happiness, right? Thought of as consisting of things like endorsement, engagement, and attunement, all of which are, of course, morally neutral. It doesn't tell you anything about how good your life is, that it has how morally good your life is, that it has these features. So what we have to say is that Diotima's confidence that we should say practical reasons bottom out in eudaimonia is not as far away as we might have thought from Kant's answer. They're actually rather close together. It's just that Kant thinks, to some degree, that the sheer beauty of moral action isn't enough to guarantee that we're too fallen to see it. And maybe Plato and Aristotle might agree with that. If only we could be properly educated and enlightened, we too would see the vastly greater beauty of justice than the beauty of wealth or power, and then we would love it more and be motivated towards it and think that our happiness consists of it. But if we can't see it, like all beauty, if we can't see it, we're indifferent to it. That's my conclusion.